Hey guys, I hope you can forgive my weird setup. I'm trying something new out here, so see how that goes. But yeah, this is kind of cool. Anyway, so if you missed the blog by Ninja Kiwi yesterday, you might not have seen this unless it's been posted elsewhere. But we have a graph which has been released, which shows the most used towers this year, basically. So yeah, so it's just ordered by it doesn't take into account cross pathing basically. It's just the most used path and that's it. But anyway, so jumping into this, as you can see here, we got number one, Dart Monkey. This kind of makes sense. Everyone gets a free Dart Monkey if you have enough knowledge, but it's very popular knowledge, so a lot of people do. It's the basic starting tower. It's pretty obvious that this one would be most placed, just because like it's the first one you can afford in any difficulty. Chimp strategies quite frequently start with two or three of them, that sort of thing. It's not often that you use the higher tiers, but it is just a very frequently placed tower. As we can see from these graphs here, first path, the Juggernaut path, and then we got Triple Darts path, and then we got the Crossbow path. Our crossbows are pretty popular. This makes sense. Our middle path, next, Triple Darts, attack speed. Yep. And then we've got this one. It's surprisingly, Juggernaut's pretty similar to these, but you have to also take into account this includes like a 2/0/0 Dart Monkey. So, yeah. I also feel Crossbow Master's probably used a lot, so that probably contributes to this one here being quite high. Anyway, Dart Monkey makes sense. Ninja Monkey. Everyone goes top path. This is actually a little surprising, but not quite once you think about it. So the other two are kind of average. We look across, yeah, this is kind of the average path here. Somewhere around there. There's quite a lot of fluctuation, but I would say this is kind of average. If you don't account for all these high ones pulling it up, like this is where, I guess this isn't the average. This is more like the median. This is just where most things are. So those two, I kind of would have expected Shinobi to be a lot higher because you got to spam so many Shinobi, but I guess they're just only used if you already have a ninja setup, and like, well, if you're already focusing on a single ninja setup, and then it's only then if you're going late game, like if you're pushing up to around 100, if you're doing a harder chimp strategy, something like that. So interesting. Regardless, Top Path Ninja is our most used tower in the entire game this year. Up until the update 17.0. So things might change, but it hasn't been nerfed in 17, so it's probably not going to drop down that much. Looking at the Wizard Monkey, we see everything on the Wizard Monkey is above average. This is like, this in the Super Monkey, they're the only towers where everything is kind of high. So there's other towers which have like 2 high, but this is these two here, only ones that have everything high. And Wizard even more so than Super. This is interesting because I wouldn't have thought many people use bottom path. But it is really cool. It's just awkward and weird to use, but hey. Yep, Arcane Spike is really good. It's used all the time. Makes sense that it's high. Dragon's Breath and Wall of Fire in general. Wall of Fire gets a lot of points for spam ability. You can just place a lot of Wall of Fires and have games work like that. And also it's quite popular in races. So there's a lot of reasons here why Wall of Fire would go high. And Dragon's Breath in general, it's not bad if you use it correctly. It's not really a spammable tower itself, but Wizard Lord Phoenix then gets lots of points for being used in like a lot of two tower chimps challenges and such. So that also makes sense. Super Monkey, all 3 high. Sun Avatar, easily used in like almost every difficult chimps map. It's an incredible tower, so absolutely makes sense. It's interesting to see the Robo so high. I'm not sure why, considering the number of people that complain about it. Not a bad tower, but it doesn't really get much spotlight. Batman, it's pretty cool. It even got buffed in this update, so it might go up. While we're talking about buffs, I may as well point this out. I added some little dots on this. Hopefully I didn't miss any, and they're all kind of weird colors, but these are ones that got buffed in 17. So yeah, if we are looking at Super Monkey, this path got buffed. It wasn't a significant buff, but it was an interesting usability buff, so I feel like this guy might jump a fair bit just because of the extra like added challenge potential. He already had pretty good challenge potential, but now there's a lot more interesting challenge potential for like specific maps like Muddy Puddles and Geared. I can see that movement having a really interesting effect. Monkey Village got 2 buffs, but so one of them was to the top path, which was already quite highly used, but this is probably mainly because of jungle drums, like jungle drums spamming or strategies. Well, not necessarily spamming, but like jungle drums and strategies where you don't necessarily need camera detection as well. So this would contribute a lot to that path being high. And in general, some primary challenges probably contributed to this. The tier 5 on its own probably contributed to this because it's quite interesting. It has some pretty good interactions. But overall, the tier 3 and the tier 4 were not too good in a lot of situations. The tier 3, probably shouldn't badmouth the tier 3. It's pretty decent. It's just only primary towers, of course. This buff to the tier 4, however, which was really bad. It might actually put these equal. You're still going to need your MIB. MIB is high for a reason. It makes everything work. That's why MIB is so incredibly good. If something wasn't going to work, it's like, okay, you work now. Just ignore everything. And it's probably never going to be buffed because of that. But Call to Arms itself isn't really too dominant a strategy. It's mainly the MIB, so we'll have to see there. Once you get into more strategies that revolve around more tower spamming, Call to Arms does get quite good. But yeah, that's not as common in meta with overclocking one tower. And the bottom path got a buff, but it wasn't too significant, so I don't expect this path here, which seems to be roughly tied for the least used in the whole game. That's probably not going to increase too much, but anytime you're doing a farming strategy, you might want to incorporate at least one of these now, so maybe it will. And in fact, if you're covering the whole map in a farming tower of some kind, like druids and farms, whatever, maybe you'd have a couple of these. So who knows? We could see a spike here, but we'll have to wait and see. Sniper Monkey got technically 2 buffs, but it's only really the middle path that was buffed. It was just a knock-on effect with the cross pathing being buffed. So we can kind of ignore that a bit. I don't think that the buff here will cause much of an effect at all to the top path because the main reason you use the top path is for the stuns. And it's always going to be better to have more frequent stuns if you're aiming for stuns. So you're going to want to cross path with the bottom and get like double stuns instead of having to have 2 snipers to do the same job. So you're not really going to want to cross path with middle, even though the shrapnel is now improved on the top path. If for some reason you want to have a single sniper that does high damage, that could be used more in challenges. But not really sure what we'll see there. At the very least, the decision in that cross path is a lot harder now if you don't need the stuns like a lot. So but the stuns are always nice, so who knows. But yeah, so you're asking more damage or more stuns. The middle path itself, I don't know if this is going to spike a lot since it's an underused sort of tower regardless, and the sniper is never going to be a heavy mobbing like type of damage dealer, but it is an incredibly huge buff, so this kind of average use thing, I'm surprised it's actually as high as it is, but that's probably because of camo snipers. If you just grab a camo sniper early on, but then you sell it, or you just never upgrade it again, so that could contribute to this statistic. But and I guess maybe it's high on maps where you can't fit farms and you just want to do supply drop farming. Could be. Hey, could be maybe that's why it's a bit higher. I know I have done supply drop strategies myself on occasion, but it's clearly just not as good as other farming strategies. So, supply drop is buffed by the bottom path village buff though, so use both of those more maybe. Who knows? Shrapnel itself, it is a lot more effective. It does a lot more damage to the second target you hit now. So I would hope to see an increase here, but who knows how big that increase will really be. Now, bomb shooter, middle path is used the most. That kind of makes some sense. You might have thought that maybe cluster bombs would be a lot more used, but I guess there's not really much of a call to do cluster bomb spamming strategies in the current meta, especially since overclock was added. It's Bomb Blitz itself, it gets used in challenges, which accounts for this number being high, I guess, and well, not necessarily high, but around not low. But yeah, it is interesting to see that Mob Mauler spam is potentially more popular than cluster bombs at the moment. The statistic itself, though, is probably inflated a bit by Mob Eliminator being a lot more popular than Bomb Blitz. And the Bomb Blitz buff was only recently, while Mob Eliminator has been quite useful in challenges at least for quite a while now. Still, though, interesting to see the Mob path for bomb higher than clusters. And in general, stun path is also higher, but that may also be attributed to heavy bombs being one of the best upgrades to get on early bomb shooters, and maybe you just don't. Maybe a lot of people just didn't finish upgrading these. The stuns themselves used more in challenges, but you don't generally go stun path on bomb shooters in what I've noticed at least. Not without something else. The tier 5, very good for stunning. Any free play strat probably uses that, like almost certainly. So it's just great at stalling. So that stat there is probably inflated just from people playing free play. Helipilot, this makes sense, I guess. You probably don't get more than one downdraft. It happens. You might get 2. You don't really get many downdrafts though. They're definitely a great tower. It's interesting to see it as low as this actually, but it's not something that feels necessary a lot of the time. It's mainly when you're trying to do some harder early game start. Comes in handy. And same with the kind of the Mob shove path, but Comanche is obviously not being used for a while. No, it has not. Apache, real good. Pursuit, real good. Apache Prime, really good. It's yeah. Apache path being high, absolutely makes sense. Downdraft being as low as it is, it kind of makes sense because it's not spammable. It's not something you'd constantly want to use, but is interesting. There was a monkey knowledge buff here. The tier 5 is the door gunner is now able to pick up towers and carry them around. I reckon we'll probably see a spike there purely from the enjoyment factor. It's much more interesting. Who knows though? Alchemist makes sense. What is this? 3rd most used tower in the game. Top Path Alchemist. It's really broken, isn't it? Top Path Alchemist is broken. But hey. Yeah. Acidic Mixture Dip. it's somewhat spammable. Berserker Brew, Stronger Stimulant, they're quite spammable. If you like, the more towers you use, the more buffs you want to get with Alchemist, because they only do a couple of buffs per Alchemist. So, and also they buff any type of tower. So you could have one of each other tower. You're gonna have one Alchemist on each of them. So easily a spammable tower. Unstable Concoction's quite low, as it's, even though it's good, only really used in challenges or when you're pushing yourself to go high in free play. Cookie Monster isn't really used much. Total Transformation is a mess, but it can be good. It can be really good if you use it right, but bit of a mess. Bottom Path Alchemist, it's fantastic in Apocalypse specifically. I don't see it used much outside of Apocalypse. Definitely not in Chimps. This one's probably a bit lower specifically because of the Chimps and interaction being terrible, but yeah, not much more to say about that. Banana Farm, we had the Bottom Path buffed. The tier 4 now stacks 10 times, so you can double the income of all merchantmen if you have 10 farms. This itself, I don't see many situations in which you would actually have the space to want to have 10 of these as well as a Buccaneer Merchantman army. But if you could somehow get the space to perfectly fit 10 of them, like Pat's Pond's probably a good example. You can fit 10 of these on Pat's Pond quite easily, and then you can fill the middle with Merchantmen. But you might not necessarily want to go the full 10, or at least straight away. It'd be a kind of balancing act. You stack more bucks, eventually it'd be better to have one more farm, but then it wouldn't be efficient to get one more farm, so you do more bucks, but then it would be efficient to get one more farm. Who knows? I haven't done the math on that, but there's not really enough maps that have like that much of a split of water and land, so it's going to be difficult to make this synergy work a lot of the time. As for the rest of the Banana Farm, Top Path, this is inflated by people spamming 200s, and then Middle Path goes up when they swap those. Oh, this doesn't count swapping, I guess, but you don't necessarily finish a game with all of your farms upgraded to banks. But this totally makes sense. 200 farms efficient, bank is efficient. The Bottom Path farm is not really too efficient, but it's getting more. I mean, it gets a lot of use from players who just don't really want to interact much, because it's definitely the laziest farm that's easiest to use. And the recent change to Monkey Knowledge, which makes it generate lives, also contributes to people there who want to have a bit more leeway in what they can just survive. These ones all make sense there. Attack Shooter, quite interesting, but also makes sense, I guess. I would have expected Overclock to be higher, but Overdrive and the Tack Zone to be higher, but they are still quite close. Bottom Path Tack is incredibly good with Pat, by the way. If you didn't know that, most people know that by now, but clearly not enough. There was recently a buff to the Inferno Ring too, so Inferno Ring, probably not going to jump too much because it's just so expensive, but you might see more challenges using Inferno Ring potentially. So it may increase in the challenge way. Middle Path, in a way surprising to see it so low, because it's one of, like, the Maelstrom is incredibly good. It's arguably one of the best things about the Tack Shooter, but it's almost certainly lower because it's an ability. And a lot of people just don't want to bother with abilities. I could potentially see this rising because of the ambush tech that was added, because ambush tech is like made for Maelstrom. It just functions so perfectly with Maelstrom. You can just target your tech bot to trigger it only when balloons in radius. It sets off the Maelstrom at the perfect time. The only reason that wouldn't necessarily happen is because tech bot costs monkey money, but if there's people who have a lot of monkey money, and there's a lot of you almost all have a lot of monkey money. Maybe that's something interesting to try. Boomerang. So we had 2 buffs on Boomerang. The Mob Domination buff was quite small, but it made it functionally considerably better. The weakness that Mob Dom has, there's 2 weaknesses. First weakness, it couldn't really hit DDTs because they just moved so fast. It wasn't because the knockback on the Mob path for Boomerang, it functions by basically doing a small knockback, but repeatedly it hits constantly, hit, and it just shoves things back. But it would basically contact the DDTs, hit once, and then keep going, and the DDT would maybe move back slightly, but it's moving back less than the projectile's moving back, so you don't get the second hit off, and it would just pass through DDT, doesn't seem to be stunned at all, moves. Mob Domination now stuns on hit, so it holds the DDT in place, and then gets the second hit, and it can kind of chain those hits more and keep pushing it back, because every hit applies a new stun. This buff was made for DDTs. It was made to make it better against DDTs. So this stat here, it's not high because of Mob Dom. It's not here because of Mob Dom. It's here because of the tier 4. So the Mob Dom change probably isn't going to increase this much because the tier 4 is just as good as it always was. We might see something, but mainly this is a functionality fix. It's a buff, but it's a functionality fix to make Mob Domination work against DDTs, and then we'll see what happens in the future there. Middle path Boomerang, it's been buffed a bunch of times in the past. It's been buffed kinda recently, not too recently, I believe, something like that. But yeah, it's solid. It's not really an incredible tower a lot of the time, but the tier 5 is actually quite decent now, and it's used in a fair few challenges. It's cleared some really hard maps. It's cleared chimps and some really hard maps, so it's definitely quite a good tower now. It's just, you don't really see Boomerangs spammed much in general. However, with the recent Monkey Village buffs on the top path, there might be some stronger interaction there. Boomerang itself wasn't one that suffered from range, but it does have an ability, so getting that faster cooldown, that's definitely a buff for the tier 5. You're gonna want to have that primary mentoring with your permacharge if you do that, because uptime on permacharge is nice, but it's already kind of a fast cooldown at the same time, so it's not going to be too significant unless there's some really specific key moments that you need to get a bit closer together, and that depends entirely on map and tower placement. Top path Boomerang, this was mainly a tier 5 buff. The Glaive Lord is actually quite affordable in a lot of chimps, in a lot of maps in general. It's a more expensive tier 5, but it's on the lower end of expensive tier 5s. So this is one you might reasonably want to save up for now, and with this being a mobbing tower, which now has a strong single target attack, it's kind of getting the Inferno Ring treatment. I could definitely see this one increasing. Definitely interesting with Boomerang there. In fact, the Glaive Lord is one of my favorite towers now with this change. It's a lot more enjoyable. In general, primary towers with the primary village, this is a really fun tactic now. Definitely one I like to do. A monkey sub. No changes specifically to the sub, but as you can see, they're all pretty average. Middle path's kind of low. Makes sense, Ballistic Missile just doesn't compare to Airburst Darts, especially once you get the tier 5, because the tier 5 only gives +1 damage, and +1 damage doesn't really do anything for Ballistic Missile, sadly, since it already does high single target damage. And Preemptive Strike's kind of just too expensive for something that can only offer support, really. Preemptive can't really deal with anything on its own. It just takes, it does a lot of damage to one layer, and then you're doomed. So unless you're doing some sort of game where you're only seeing regular Moabs, or you have something you can take out all the regular Moabs you're only seeing BFBs, having all those different layers just kind of ruins it. Top Puff sub, it gets used for decamoing, and it's really good in races as the Energizer. That's not the Energizer specifically, the reactor, but Energizer does give it a boost because of use in free play with reducing cooldowns as well. Blue Gunner had a middle path buff. I've actually seen a lot of comments here, so I will address something. But yeah, so Blue Gunner, they all get used. They just don't get spammed. It's not a very spammable tower, which is why the stats are not huge. But middle path, it's definitely low for a reason. You only need one. If you have two middle path glue gunners, then you're doing something wrong. Because all they do is deal with regular balloons that do nothing to Moabs until you get to the tier 5, which can increase damage that Moabs take. But yeah, they hit every balloon. There's not a single balloon that gets past this tower. So you have two, you're doing something wrong. That's why it's so low. You only ever have one. Now that the tier 4 has the same effect the tier 5 has, you could reasonably have maybe two of these if you want full uptime on that. But the tier 5 itself has more than 4 times the uptime of the tier 4 on this glue effect. So you only really need one tier 5 and maybe one other tier 4 if you desperately want to keep this at full uptime. But there's honestly probably not much reason to do that. The cooldown is so fast and the duration is so long. It'll do everything you really want. It's probably going to stay low forever. Let's just say. Bottom path? Same kind of deal, you only really need one or two. It does depend on the map. If you have maps that are really split, you might want to have one at one end, one at the other end. Or like in the case of Muddy Puddles, you might want to have one slowing Moabs on these two paths, one slowing the Moabs on these two paths. But it's not super spammable. You potentially want two, but you'd never really want to get more than two. It's possible, but not necessary for the vast majority of maps. The glue lasts a long time. The slow is so effective that stuff generally doesn't get past unless you're losing. So yeah. Top path. Kind of surprising to see this as high as it is. I would always pick the other two paths myself. But the balloon solver is actually really good in specific strategies. I just don't do too many of those myself. We'll probably not see much change here. It's a pretty well balanced tower overall. The lower tiers are not incredibly good, but they can work just fine, and the tier 5 is actually a very good tower. Spike Factory. Can someone explain to me why the first path is the most used? And can anyone who uses the first path more than the others, maybe can you give a statement here? Because this doesn't check out in my book. Bottom path Spike Factory, easily the best Spike Factory, easily one of the best towers in the game. It's not spammable. This is why it's not used so much. Like the use count is average-ish because most people only ever have one of these. Mainly since the tier 5 is incredibly good, but the tier 4 is only really an early game sort of use. You can use a couple of them early game if you really want to, but there's not much of a reason to do that. Unless you just really love the tower. Or you're doing a really specific challenge. Middle path gets used for the, it gets used for the ability. It does get used a fair bit, but it's one of those ones as well. You probably don't want to focus too much on having a lot of these because your defense is really gonna suffer in other ways if you're focusing on the tower that can only really deal high damage to Moabs. It's good as a panic button or specifically being used to shotgun a BAD or to take out like widespread DDTs potentially. But yeah. Again, so those two specifically, they're not spammable, which is why they're kind of lower. Top path probably is more spammable if it was good. Maybe this is inflated by free play because of super mines being used in free play. But aside from that, interesting to see. Druid Top Puff, this is probably not Superstorm, but Superstorm is probably adding, again, in free play, it's getting a bit of inflation there. Superstorm's not used outside of free play. As far as I'm aware, people don't really do that. The reason that this is high is because people like getting the Whirlwind. Whirlwind is quite good. And the Ball Lightning. Ball Lightning is very good. I'm actually surprised that the Top Puff here is higher in use, because I would have thought, because like the best way to use it is actually with bottom puff Populus buffs. So I would have thought that a lot of people who like this tower would have got a bunch of Populus to speed it up as well, and that would have swayed this more in the favor of Populus, especially with like Avatar of Wrath being so good. But yeah, it is confusing here because Druid is an incredibly spammable tower. The Druid bottom path specifically, it is really spammable. It's useful to get a bunch of 002s down because you can like leak a bunch of lives intentionally early on, double all their rates. It's useful to get a bunch of tier 4s down because it's so spammable. You can get 5 of them, they all buff each other. You can get up to 6, I think, and then they all buff the other druids. So if you're going to have this one, you should be having a bunch of these too. Like, if you're gonna have like lightning or tornadoes or ball lightning, you're gonna want a bunch of bottom path. This is a confusing stat here. So if you're one of the people that uses top path, please use bottom path too. I don't know what else to say about that. Carry on. Middle path is kinda higher because of its use as a farmer tower. That was nerfed this year, but it's still probably got a lot of use before then. It's fairly spammable too. It's kind of a cheaper low tier tower that you can spam to eliminate ceramics, and then the tier 4 is a spammable cash generating tower. So yeah. Monkey Ace. Well, the fighter pilot got a buff, somewhat. It's a usability buff. The damage itself is a bit lower, but it can hit way more targets now, so definitely overall it's going to be much stronger. These are all kind of average. This makes sense. Fighter Pilot, it's a decent tower. Sky Shredder has always been kind of fun, quite good in the right hands, but it lacks in some ways. Got a buff recently, which probably contributed to use this year. It's interesting to see Middle Path lower than the Fighter Pilot, because I would have thought that Middle Path was probably the best path currently. It gets really good use on the Bomber Ace. It's good in races as the Bomber Ace. The Ground Zero is also good in races, also good in the regular game, also spammable. Well, the tier 3 definitely spammable. The tier 4 a lot less spammable, but definitely you can spam it still. The tier 5 has useful challenge properties, like the stun's useful, it has high damage, useful in races. Yeah, I would have thought that one would be higher, especially with the Wing Monkey knowledge. Bottom Path, Never Miss, I expected that to be high. A lot of people like to meme on Never Miss, but it's actually quite a good tower. It always has been in every Bloons game that it's appeared in. It'll be curious to watch the Monkey Ace there. Overall, not really too used a tower because it's hard to get early on, and it doesn't have many like high tiers that are affordable and really all round great. Monkey Buccaneer. This middle stat, okay, middle path was buffed. But the middle one itself is probably inflated a bit due to challenges. It gets spam sold and bought again in challenges a lot, so that inflates its middle path a fair bit. Like you can have a single round where people place quite a lot of them, and I would say that contributes to most of the use here. It has other purposes, but I think that's the single purpose that's really driving that middle path until now. Bottom path, it's spammable, but not really great. So that's why it's kind of average. It's because, well, kind of below average, really. It's because, yes, it's spammable, so some people spam it, but no, it's not good, so most people don't. Makes sense. Top path, Destroy is actually quite fun. And especially now, Destroy is better than ever. This is probably going to increase quite a lot, I would expect. I would definitely expect. But we'll see. Overall, Destroyer is probably going to overtake down. Yeah. Destroyer itself is actually quite spammable too, so and you can place a bunch of them under Gwen or Pat, get a lot of damage out there. Definitely interesting. Ice Monkey. We had some... I don't know if they're significant enough, but they're definitely groundbreaking for the Ice Monkey. So the Top Puff, it's changed a lot. It has more range. It has more buffs that really matter from the Monkey Village, so you're probably going to have Monkey Village near it. And the tier 4 Embrittlement now also removes properties. It removes camo, it sees camo naturally, which makes it the second primary tower that has an affordable camo detection at the kind of the lowish tiers. Tier 4 is not low, but you know, it's a very cheap tier 4 compared to a lot in the game. And yeah, and it removes regrow as well, so even though it's kind of roughly below average, that's hopefully will go up. I don't think that the embrittlement is affordable enough for this to take on a role of like a radar scanner village. It's not gonna be that good because it just can't deal with Moabs. Like, this is a support tower, so spending that much on something that can't deal with Moabs, you're probably gonna be getting it roughly around 40 and then losing to the Moabs. So it's more of a tower that if you already have a defense that can deal with camo, somewhat, but maybe not that well, you're probably going to be placing this after round 40 when you've already taken out the Moab. But if you've got a strategy that needs camo detection after round 40 and can take out the Moab, then this would slot in quite well. I don't know of many strategies that kind of fit like that. We'll see. Middle path ice. Also, on the top path, we got the permafrost change, so every tier 5 ice is buffed. We might see Icicle and Pale rise, but it's not... Probably not. Probably not. Middle path ice, probably not going to rise as well, but it's got an interesting effect here where the... if you use the tier 5 ability, it now makes all ice monkeys on the entire screen gain a 50% fire rate bonus. So you suddenly... Like, if you have a defense where you're using Embrittlement, and maybe you're using Icicle and Pale as well, or maybe just Icicle and Pale, you're going to get suddenly a lot more out of those. It applies to all Ice Monkeys, but definitely, if somehow you manage to afford all 3 of the tier 5 Ice Monkeys, you're going to get a fair bit out of that. Unfortunately, though, Embrittlement itself does not pair well with Icicle Impale since it does 50 damage per hit on Moabs. You could potentially make it work with the ice shards from the icicles from the bottom path ice, because they themselves don't do high damage, they're quite low. So if you can get icicles going off and hitting things that have been embrittled, then that's a big damage increase there, but it still doesn't compare to the 50 damage the main hit does, so you're probably gonna want something else to deal with those balloons that come out of the Moabs. Engineer, second lowest in the ratings. Poor Engineer. Overclock, most broken tower in the game, not spammable. It costs like 15,000 and you use Overclock to make one tower really strong. Maybe you get a second, but you never really get 3 overclocks. That's not a thing unless you're doing deep free play. Unfortunate. Bottom path Engineer. It's meant to be a damage cash generator hybrid. It doesn't quite do enough of either of those with the current balloon traps, so this explains why it's quite low. And the tier 5 balloon trap, while really cool, really strong, is really expensive, so that's why that's quite low. Top path Engineer is actually the highest. It's not as good as the middle path, but it's higher because it's a much more spammable upgrade. And the tier 5 on it is actually quite fun to use. And actually quite affordable as well. And the least used tower in the game, Mortar Monkey. Does this mean Mortar Monkey needs a buff? Not really. Because Mortar Monkey is doing its job. And it just got a buff as well. The most used path is the one that got buffed. That's because this is probably the most spammable path. Honestly. So you only get the bottom path. You only need one of those because you get it for the defortification. And once it has removed that fortification, it doesn't really do anything anymore. It has 0 damage itself. Unless you have the tier 5, which is super expensive. So more of a free play tower. Definitely a really good tower. Not too affordable. So that's why it's low. And also not spammable. You only get one of them. So that's why it's low. Does this path need a buff? Maybe a small one, but it makes sense that it would be on the lower end because there's literally just no reason you would get 2 of them, and unless you desperately wanted to not micro like 2 different paths. But it's just so expensive to get that tier 4 that you're probably gonna want to micro it to get the best use out of it. And also because there's no point in constantly hitting something that's already been defortified. There's no point there. Top Puff, again, you only need one. The main use here, it does a kind of similar job to the Balloon Solver in that it just literally deletes all ceramics from the game. They don't exist anymore. They're not something you have to worry about. And one of them does this. One tier 5, and it's not too expensive. It's on the higher end for something that's just does huge AoE and not much single target, but it does actually do, considering the infinite range and the huge area of effect, it does actually do quite good against mobs as well. So again, this is not something you spam. You get one of these and it's good. It's really good. And so yeah, the top and the bottom path, they're both really good. Middle path, which was actually the most used, the reason it's more used is because it has to be spammed to actually do anything. Because the other one's you're one and done. One and done top path, one and done bottom path. Middle path, it's just a DPS. So if you're lacking DPS, you get another one. It just got a buff increasing its DPS, but it only gains that increased damage against stunned balloons. Sorry, that's a brand new synergy. It'll work really well with Striker Jones, who can basically perma stun. It works really well with the tier 5 and the middle path, so that'll hopefully get used more just in its own. I tried it the other day, and I beat Adora's Temple using pretty much not much aside from middle path mortars and Striker Jones. So we probably won't expect to see top or middle mortar rise much at all, because regardless of any buffs that happen, there's still a one and done tower. Middle path, we might see that rise with this change. I would hope so, because I think this is actually a significant buff, and it was quite underrated before. Not incredibly good, but definitely a more average tower. It's not too far below average. And with this buff, I would say in the right synergy, it's just quite good. But so that's the entire graph here. Turn off these dots I added now. I just wanted to kind of talk about this and and show it off for anyone who hadn't already found it, because the Ninja Kiwi blog itself is not incredibly well known that it's even a thing. I will put a link in the description to the blog. There is a new blog every Friday. If Friday's a public holiday, it's generally Thursday, or it might be skipped sometimes, but generally it's every single Friday. You get a bit of news about what's going on at Ninja Kiwi. They answer a few questions. It's something worth checking out. You see a few cool things. It's not extremely informative a lot of the time, but it's definitely worth checking out if you got like 2 spare minutes, because it's a quick read and you get to learn more about what's going on in Ninja Kiwi. I probably missed quite a lot that I could have mentioned about this data, but I didn't want to analyze it like for hours on end. I just wanted to show it off, and if anyone doesn't mute this, they got to hear me rambling. So yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this, got some good information out of it, and I'll see you around. And let me know about this little format I did. Thanks.